Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Formula Bharat Academy Workshop this season. We are glad that you could all make it for this virtual event. Before we begin, kindly mute your microphones while present in this room. If you are stuck amongst others, hold on the letter G to move through a crowd. Please maintain the decorum of the room. As the speaker will be presenting via Zoom, you can view his presentation via the video thumbnail on the bottom right of the screen. Double-click on the thumbnail for a full view. We begin today's session with opening notes by Pat Clarke. For those of you who are new to Formula Student, Pat has been a renowned design judge in the series since 1996. He brings a wealth of technical knowledge to students through his experiences and learnings, both in and out of the field. Although retired now, Pat still produces a lot of reading material for Formula Student participants. It goes without saying that his contributions have been greatly appreciated. So without further ado, please welcome Pat. Pat, you may go ahead.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for that lovely introduction.
You're welcome.
So we're all here already, all sitting down, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and ready to hear what Pat's going to say to them. Okay, well, the first thing that I'm going to say to you is that I'd like to thank Kathy and her crew for the opportunity to talk to you. I am a communicator, and I have to say that this pandemic, this darn pandemic, it's changed our lives forever. But Kath and her team have really done a job to keep Formula Bharat alive and relevant, and we all owe them a special thanks. So thanks, Kathy. Not just from me, but basically from everybody. You're doing a great job, and I'm really glad that 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it was, we talked you into it. Okay, now I've got to make this thing work, don't I?
Pat, if you'd like, you can always turn on your video. However, if you have bandwidth issues, you can leave it off.
Oh, there's the video there. Yeah,
sure. There you go. Hi, Pat. Nice to see you.
Hello. And I was just saying, I'm glad we talked you into this 4 or 5 years ago, or whatever it was. At the time, it was against Kathy's better judgment, but we prevailed, and she's doing. And it's fair to say, not just Kathy. Kathy's done a great job leading it, but she's got a fantastic team around them, and they're doing a great job. Absolutely brilliant job, and I'm pleased and proud to be part of it. Okay, so as I say here, for the last couple of years, we've been radically affected by this COVID-19 pandemic. Where it started or why it started, a matter for discussion and debate, but it really doesn't matter. It's a fact. In my lifetime, I'm now 75 years of age, and in my lifetime, there's never been anything like this. I read today that there have been almost 400,000 deaths in India from 30 million infections. I mean, that is scary stuff. And that makes it inconceivable that these numbers don't include members of our Formula Bharat family. So I think we should all take a moment to remember them, whoever they may be. 400,000 deaths, that's a lot of people. But anyway, we should just take a moment and remember the people that unfortunately aren't with us or aren't able to join us because they're ill. Of lesser importance, is the effect that this pandemic has had on Formula Bharat, on the competition. So what I'll be talking about today is the restrictions caused by COVID-19, and I thank you for listening. What's happened is we've managed to get ourselves halfway through the year. It's now almost July, and nobody's even started, or very little amount of work has been done on trying to get a project up and running before the event, which is slated for next January. I have 3 rules, one of Pat's 3 rules. There are 3 things that you need to have a viable Formula student team. You need people, you need money, and you need time. One of Pat's rules of 3. We can't overcome them all. we're affected by social distancing and the need to look after our health affects our people side of the triangle. Money is also affected because businesses are closed or struggling, so it's hard to get sponsorship. So our budgets are reduced. But the worst thing is the time that we've lost. 6 months has gone by already, and although you can replace people and you can replace money, you can't replace time. So what we have to really talk about in this is managing, project managing and time managing to try and ensure that that you have a viable car to enter and run a successful Formula Bharat event in January. First up, some words of wisdom. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of George Santayana, but back in 1905, that's like 170 years ago or something. No, more than that. Whatever. He wrote these words. He said, "Those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Now, I first came across those words on a big sign on the wall in the U.S. Air Force Museum in the U.S. And I thought about it, and I thought, God, that's right. And then I thought about it and thought, if we do remember the mistakes and the errors and the things, surely it's better to learn the mistakes from other people rather than make our own mistakes so that we can learn them. So Santayana's words are basically telling us that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Okay, if we're going to talk about history and where we come from and what it's all about, I'm going to give you a little history lesson here, because I find that many of the participants and students involved don't really know what Formula Student is all about, or Formula Bharat is all about. Back in the 1980s, the formula was started in the US. It then morphed into Formula Student in the UK in the early 1990s, I guess. And eventually, through Formula Student, it arrived in India. There were a few false starts, but Bharat got in place about 5 years ago. Back in the late 1970s, industry was dissatisfied with the quality of young engineers that were graduating from university. Theoretically, they were very good, but the university was not able or was unwilling to give them practical skills. There was no ability, they had no ability to do the practical things. The late, great Carl Smith, I'll tell you about Carl in a minute, he said they can calculate the stresses in a bolted joint, but they don't know which way to turn the wrench, or as we'd say, spanner. Carl was a race car engineer who got involved with Formula SAE back in the 1980s. And it was actually Carl that recruited me. As Kat said, I joined the family in 1996, and I've been a judge basically ever since. Carl was a great race engineer, and he was a great author. He wrote a series of books, the Carl Smith To Win series, so the Race to Win, Engineer to Win, Prepare to Win, and so on and so forth. If you haven't got those books in your library, you should get them. They're available as a bundle from many bookshops. Certainly from you can buy them off Amazon or wherever. Several engineering competitions were planned to try and give these graduating students some practical experience to prepare them for life in the big world, like life in industry, excuse me. To ensure student interest, several themes were chosen. They've got, an aircraft competition. They've got a clean snowmobile competition. They've got several competitions. But the competition with the race car theme is what emerged as the most popular by far. I guess there's a little bit of magic in a race car. Most young men sort of, I guess, dream of being the next Ayrton Senna or Lewis Hamilton or whoever's the hero of the time. However, one thing that has to be said, and I'm going to make this very clear, Formula Bharat, Formula Student, Formula SAE, they are not race car competitions. Okay? Formula Student, it's an educational exercise. The aim of the competition is not to give you guys free hand to go out and do skids around the corners at high speed. That's not what it's all about. That's the side benefit. What we're all about here is trying to educate you about how things work in the real world. That's why part of the competition is having to defend your design before the design judges, to have a realistic costing of your project and be able to defend that costing before the cost judges, to be able to present your project as you would, say, to a board of management, and also the timelines that you have to meet. What the competition is trying to do is trying to replicate what happens in the real world. Unfortunately, it's not quite like that, because in the real world, in business, generally deadlines may be long, or they may be short, or they may be soft, or they may be hard. Whereas with Formula, we have a fairly easy project in that we have 1 year. We know that the event is going to be on a certain date in January, and we know that our various submissions have to be placed by certain times, and so on and so forth. So we've got a nice, shall we say, ladder of progression to go along. We can drive mile pegs into the ground to mark where we're supposed to be. Unfortunately, COVID has tossed us for a loop, and it's taken away half of our time, which means that now the competition that we're preparing for in January next year is actually much more like what business is like in the real time. We've been tossed a curved ball, and basically we have to play it. So let's get back to the subject. Rules of three. As I've said, I have several rules of three. They're nice and easy to remember, but the first one I'm going to talk about is you need three things to run an effective formula team. I mentioned them before: people, money, and time. And they're all interconnected. If you have more people, well, you can gain a little bit of time. They're all connected. Okay. Every rule has been affected by COVID-19. First of all, there are less people available. People don't want to join a group association. People can't travel. Trying to maintain social distancing means it's difficult to work in workshops together. It's difficult to sit down and have planning meetings or whatever the case may be. However, there's more than 1 billion people in India, so it shouldn't be too hard to get a sufficient number to have a viable team. And in fact, on many teams, I see too many passengers. People who are along for the ride, they're intrigued by the exciting motorsport side of it, but they don't actually want to do the work that they should be doing. And so maybe a culling of the numbers in the team can help keep a tighter team, a more coordinated team, a better team to be able to work towards the end that we've got to work towards. Okay. The magnetism of Formula Student, that will ensure that the real enthusiastic team members will stay. Those who are less involved or not that interested may well leave. And as I said, that can be a good thing. I have seen successful Formula Student teams complete the project with as few as 6 members. That's not enough, but it can be done. Obviously, care must be taken. I'm talking here about looking after people's health, and this might mean that the project might need to be moved from wherever you're currently located to a safer location. In other words, away from people. Okay, handling the people problem, and I've marked that as critical. You must listen to this. The current circumstances require that very stringent management practices need to be adapted. The team manager needs to be an absolute dictator or things won't happen. This is no time for faffing around. You can democratize yourself into mediocrity. Basically, what you have to do is to make a plan, design your little car, get to and build it. No shortcuts, no redesigns, no arguments about what's what. You just have to. It might not be perfect. In fact, it might be far from perfect, but you've got to get on and do it. Otherwise, you just won't be there. And there is nothing sadder than going to a competition and seeing the teams who turn up with an unfinished project, unable to compete. They've put their heart and soul into the project for a whole year, or less than a year in this case, but they put their heart and soul in, they've worked, and they fell short. So with less time, it needs a stricter management. Like, you really do need a very strong dictator of a manager, and he needs to be a person capable of driving the thing through to the finish. Not pleasant, but that's what's got to happen. Okay, the second thing is that your management must follow the KISS principle. This acronym was reportedly coined by Kelly Johnson, who is a very famous aviation engineer. A great story for another time, and lessons to be learned too. But KISS stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid. All complication in the design or the construction of your car or the management of your team must be avoided. Absolutely. Complication will just eat up your time, your money, and your people. It's a luxury you cannot afford. Don't even waste time thinking about it. And don't worry that your judges might not like a simple car. Like, oh, gee, we don't have any push rods and we've got no air package and our car's not made out of carbon fiber. Who really cares? The truth of the matter is that Leonardo da Vinci once had to say that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So, okay. Moving along, we'll talk about money. Each rule has been affected by COVID. We've spoken about the effect on people. Now there's the effect on money. The reduction in business and the lockdowns and difficulty of interacting with potential sponsorship has reduced available funds. However, there should be adequate funding available for a viable Bharat exercise. Now, get this straight. There won't be perhaps as much funding or as much money as you would like. So the plan, and part of the Keep It Simple thing, is to not plan stuff that's going to cost a lot of money. You have to look at ways of reducing your costs. I said the money tree, it does exist. The difficulty is finding it, and that requires people and time. And I'm going to talk a little bit in a while about how you go about raising money. As I said, the lack of a budget should cause the team to critically assess their situation. A lack of people and time will limit the amount of components a team can make, thus forcing outsourcing. For instance, do you really need to make a carbon fiber steering wheel? Or can you raise some funding and buy a steering wheel over the counter at the same time you buy your quick release device? You haven't got the time to develop and build those things, but you can use the time that would have been consumed in building that stuff to do the stuff that you got to do, like put a chassis together or whatever. So don't make anything that you can buy or repurpose from previous car. said, obviously, this doesn't include an unmodified chassis because the rules prohibit this. So you can't just reuse the chassis. However, I've made a little note that some suitable modifications to the old chassis may well suffice. Later on, I'm going to talk about something which would involve literally cutting the back off the chassis and building a new back end. Now, listen good, because this is difficult to say. But if a team can't fund their project, they should delay it until better times. In other words, if you can't raise enough money to do what you want to do or to do what you've got to do, put it aside till next year. It means you get an early start at next year. What you should do then is attend Formula Bharat as volunteers. I'm sure Kathy can use all the volunteers that she can get as workers at the event. And when you get there, you'll get most of the benefits of the Formula student experience. Okay, you don't get to drive the car because you haven't got a car. However, you will get to sit down and talk to the judges, talk to people like me, look at other teams' cars, see how the competition works, see how the judging happens. And that in itself can be an extremely educating experience and will actually make you much better prepared for when you come back next year. So I'll say that again. If you can't fund the project, instead of starting off something that you can't finish, don't plan for failure. Put it aside, get an early start for next year, and put your hand up and come as volunteers. Okay. I've said here that saving money is making money. Anything you already own, anything you can get for free, or anything you don't need, you don't basically need to spend money on. However, you do need money to cover things like unavoidable expenses such as entry fee, transport, and all that sort of stuff. You do need money to buy components that you might otherwise have made, and you do need to buy a decent set of tires. I'll come to that in due course. But anything that you already own, or anything you can get for free, or anything that you don't actually need. Now, in acquiring stuff for free, it may be that some stuff is available free or very cheaply that might not be exactly what you want, but if you can adapt it to purpose and do a nice sanitary, clean engineering job of incorporating it into your project, there's nothing wrong with that. The majority of production race cars made all over the world, in the smaller formulas like, Formula 4 or Formula 3, Formula Ford, they actually use production components all over. Steering racks modified from one production car, suspension uprights from another car, wheel assemblies or hubs and brakes, calipers from carefully chosen from various production cars. Adapted, modified, or adapted to use in your project, there is nothing wrong with that. That makes a lot of sense. You don't have to make everything. However, we don't like to see what the judges call kit cars. This is where we have teams who will go to a business, and there are several of them in India, and basically they buy the Formula student kit, which includes a steering rack and uprights and shocks and springs and a differential, a steering wheel, a seat, and a myriad of other things. And then they take them away and basically just build a frame around it and say, here we are with our newly designed chassis or whatever. What's going to happen if you do that is the judges are going to look at some of these components, like say, for instance, a front suspension upright, and they're going to say to you, okay, I want you to tell me the engineering analysis that you did to design this upright. Well, we didn't design that upright. However, if you have bought that upright and you're going to use it on your car, and you know that the judge is going to ask you a question like that, you should be retrospectively doing analysis. Why was it designed that way? Um, what's the logic behind the design? Because some of the components that we've seen from those kit car manufacturers has been actually very, very poor quality, not well thought out. Okay, let's see what the next slide says. Talking here about using anything you already own. So reuse anything you can from a previous car. This includes the drivetrain. So if you currently have, say, an internal combustion car and you wanted to move to an electric car, put that on hold and just reuse your internal combustion drivetrain. The electric car can go next year. You just haven't had the time to do it. As I said, the chassis can be reused if sufficiently modified. And not only will this reduce expenditure, but it will also release some people and some time that would otherwise have been needed to design and make these things. As I said earlier, the people, time, and money are all tied together, inexplicably linked. Okay. For existing teams, you need to take an audit of what you already have and reuse everything possible. So in effect, you're building a Mark II version of what you already have. For a new team, it's a bit more difficult because they have to start from first principles. You have to start from scratch. Kathy told me a story yesterday about one new team who are struggling. They want to attend the event in January, and the university is insisting that they build an electric car. I can make you a little promise. They are not going to be ready for the event in January. An electric car is much more difficult. There's much more paperwork, much more complication involved in an electric car than there is in an IC car. So if you're starting from fresh, it might not be what you want to do. You might believe that, electric cars is the savior of the future, but hang on a minute. We're not trying to save the world with Formula Student. What we're trying to do is to give students a good finishing school so that they can learn how to deal with projects in the real world, make things, and you have to remember that this competition might not have even been a race car or whatever. We could have had a competition for you to, say, develop a cement mixer. Who can develop the best cement mixer? I mean, nobody would be very interested in that because it's not exciting, whereas a race car is exciting. But never was there the intent to save the world or to develop technology that can be used, like autonomous cars or whatever. And of course, the other thing is that electric cars, they're still a long way in the future. There's still a lot to learn. Batteries have a long, long way to go before we're ready. But I'll get off my high horse now and start talking about real stuff. Okay, the second thing was anything that you can get for little or no cost. Well, this is actually another form of sponsorship. And as I said before, it's easier to adapt something that's not quite right than to try source or make something that's perfect. And what's actually perfect? If we go back to steering wheels again, almost every student-made steering wheel that I have seen in a Formula Student car is too small. Their experience with steering wheels and whatever usually comes from simulators, games and game simulators, and they have these little steering wheels that look like a mini Formula One steering wheel. But there is so little leverage available in these small diameter steering wheels that after about 4 laps, the poor old driver's arms are falling off, and you can't complete the laps and get a good performance in the dynamic events, especially the endurance event, if the poor old driver's arms are cramped and he can't move another inch. So whereas when you go buy a steering wheel, it will probably be a 13-inch steering wheel rather than a 10-inch steering wheel that the teams insist on making. Okay, now just take a deep breath for a minute, and if anybody's taking notes, I want you to take notes of what I'm going to talk to you about next. I'm going to expand on this a little more than is actually written on the slide. This is basically a matter of how you go about raising money. Okay. Firstly, how are you going to find potential sponsors? You know, sending out a broadcast email or printing off 1,000 flyers and sending them out, or even making telephone calls is not going to result in too much sponsorship or too much help. For my sins, at one stage in my life, I was the product and marketing manager for a big company in Australia. And every week I used to get letters from people which said something along the lines of, "Dear sir, please give me some money to spend on my race car." I like race cars. I like motorsport. I used to ask myself, what is in this for me and my company? The answer is usually nothing. What were they going to do in return? Well, they were going to put a sticker on the car, and they were going to, well, not do much else. Maybe put out some flyers. So there is no shall we say, balance in what you're giving the team for what you get in return. So the response to most requests for money to go motor racing is very negative. So don't present yourself as a racing team. You're not a racing team. Formula Student is not motor racing. It might be a nice game to play. You might have lovely shirts and uniforms and various things. You may call yourself, the Delhi University racing team or whatever. Don't do that. First of all, once you've identified a potential sponsor, and I'll talk about that in a minute, present yourself as representatives of your university who are competing in an international engineering competition. Okay, now there's a feel-good thing. The person that you're asking for money has a good citizenship feeling. He's doing his little bit for society, and the chances of you getting help or assistance is extremely good. It may also be that there is a tax break for the company doing that. They may be able to write off whatever they give you to help as a tax concession at the end of the year when they pay their annual taxes. You don't need to know or care about that, but certainly it's a bonus or a benefit for the potential sponsor. Now, the next thing I'm going to tell you, and this is hugely important, first of all, you need to sit down and you need to identify viable potential sponsors. Don't just use the scattergun approach, fire stuff around. You need to approach really good potential sponsors. And don't pick all of the obvious ones like the Red Bull or Coca-Cola or Marlboro cigarettes or Suntory whiskey. Try to pick companies, particularly companies who may be in the area of perhaps employing graduates from your university or having some involvement with the university or the city that you're in. Now, once you've picked these people, you need to contact them and contact the company and make an appointment to see the marketing manager or the engineering manager or whatever it is face to face. No point in getting an email address, send them an email. Insist that you want to actually meet them face to face for a short meeting, not a huge presentation. And the reason I say that is that I got to tell you this. If you ask for somebody, look them in the eye, and with a reasonable request, and ask them for help, It is almost impossible for someone to say no. Okay? Almost impossible for somebody to just, like it's a cold-blooded person who says, no, go away. They may not be able to give you what you're asking for, but they will try save face by making you some sort of an offer. So you might, for instance, go to a company and say, look, we need some help, we need some sponsorship. Our gold level sponsorship is, I don't know, 1 lakh or whatever. And the guy says, no, look, I can't do that. I just don't have it in my budget. But I tell you what I can do. I could give you the use of one of our trucks to take your car to the event. Whoa, that's not money, but that's just sure saved you a truckload of money. But as I say, the trick is to look the person in the eye and to ask for help. Almost impossible for somebody to say no. Okay, that's probably the most valuable piece of advice that I'm going to give you this evening. Okay, moving along. Anything you don't need. What do you actually need? Do you really need push rods and bell cranks and all that nonsense? No, you don't. Drivers have won World Formula One championships with simple direct acting suspension. Do you really need an aero package? Well, no, you don't, because the majority of aero packages are literally only adding extra weight and extra complication. Do you need a team uniform? No, just dress tidily. So leave all those extras for next year when you have more people and money and time. Another rule of 3. Anything that's not on the car doesn't cost you anything, doesn't weigh anything, and it can't break. Let's go back to push rods and bell cranks and so on and so forth. If you go to direct acting suspension, that means that you remove from your car 4 push rods, 8 rod ends, 4 bell cranks, 4 bell crank pivots, and 4 additional nodes or hard points on your chassis where you've got to pivot these nodes. So by deleting all of that, you've probably taken 4 or 5 kilograms of weight out of the car. You've probably taken quite a bit of money out of what you were, and you've saved quite a lot of time because you're not making those components and trying to make them work. As I said, if you Google, race cars from the 60s, Google Formula Ford race cars from the 60s and 70s, and you'll see all sorts of good ideas about how to arrange a suspension that'll work for you. Okay. What you do need money is to cover your unavoidable expenses, the entry fee for the event, transport to get there, and these need to be paid in hard currency. Kathy's not going to take an IOU for the entry fee. However, as I said before, some kind of in-kind sponsorship might cover the cost of shipping the car or some other things. Or you might even have a potential sponsor who will make you team uniforms. Okay, now you can look like professionals without having the additional cost expense of buying team uniforms, but there are all sorts of stuff. One good sponsor would be to try find somebody to buy you some tires, because tires are critical. We'll come back to that. I said, do you need actual money? You do need actual money to buy some stuff that you might otherwise have made. So for instance, the steering wheel, the seat, the impact attenuator, instrumentation, and so on and so forth. Don't waste time, don't waste money, and don't waste personnel on projects that will not add value or points to your car. As I've said, you can buy some time by finding budget to buy components. Finally, buy a decent set of tires. the only grip you have between you and the ground. The biggest contribution to performance, actually the second biggest contribution to performance, is the tires. The biggest contribution is going to be driving practice. The more seat time your drivers get, the more comfortable they will be with driving the car, and they will learn the adjustments that are needed to be made to springs or cambers or towing or whatever to make the car more easier to drive and more reliable. But certainly that's where the time will come from. Follows that if you're going to do some driver testing, it's obviously necessary to get that car finished early. Whoops, now we're looking for even more time. You need to get the car finished at least a month before the competition. At least a month, because I promise you, things are definitely going to break. These are definitely going to break. The one place where you can get some driver practice, at least get the driver's coordination right with the usual solution of a right foot throttle and a left foot brake and direct steering, is at the local go-kart center. And you might even get sponsorship from the local go-kart center to enable your drivers to learn to drive. At least learn the muscle memory that they need to develop to drive before they get to the competition. Okay, powertrain. I've said before, don't plan for an EV. If you have a current EV and you transfer your electric motor, batteries, and your control system across to the new car, that's all okay. However, if you are starting from scratch, or you don't have a valid, or you haven't sorted the electrical powertrain out yet, the real answer is an engine. I've said choose an engine of whatever legal capacity is available. There's no best engine. I'll talk about this a little more in a future slide, but said here, the single-cylinder KTM 390 engine has simple intake and exhaust system, and there's a lot of information available for this engine. So that's a very valid choice. The only trap that we keep seeing teams fall into there is they remove the throttle body, which I think is 47 millimeters in diameter, and between the throttle body and the induction system of the engine itself, they fit their 20 millimeter restrictor. Well, that means that when the throttle is opened about 30%, the area of throttle opening is equal to the area of the 20 mil restrictor, and so the restrictor is saturated. And any more throttle does not allow in any more air. However, it will allow more fuel, so the engine just drowns in fuel. The car is extremely difficult to drive. The throttle is like a light switch because you've got so little throttle movement for the car to operate in. It's very difficult to drive. The dead set giveaway of that is that when the driver tells you, oh, when I lift off the throttle a little bit, the car seems to go better. Because as they lift off the throttle, they're leaning down the mixture and the car will go a little better. There's a different solution though. Many parts can be sourced from small front drive cars, and I'm saying here, think Tata Nano. The whole powertrain from a Nano is legal for use in Formula Bharat, with the only necessity to add a restrictor in the induction system. The maximum engine capacity is 710 cc's. The Nano is 625, fits in there. The Nano is a 2-cylinder overhead camshaft engine. It's got a Bosch fuel injection system. It's a reasonably modern little car. It includes its own transmission and four-speed transmission, its own differential drive shafts, all sorts of good stuff. Transplanting the entire drivetrain from a Nano into the back of your Formula student car, and this might be last year's car that you've
cut the back off the chassis and you now have to build a new back on it, would actually give you a viable, easy to drive, but heavy Formula student car. Now, a lot of the problems that you have in sourcing things all comes in one package. You don't have to worry about drive shafts and constant velocity joints and brakes and calipers, because they all come in one package. And I'm sure that, you know, the Nano being the disaster that it was in the marketplace, that there are lots of them out there being wrecked, or even to buy an entire car and cannibalize it for what you need. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, you should, what you got to do is go out and use a Nano engine in your car. However, I am presenting it as a very viable solution for a car to be made in a short period of time under COVID restrictions with the least amount of design input into the powertrain. All that will be needed is to fit a restrictor between the intake throttle body and the intake manifold in the car of 20 millimeters. And I think a Nano throttle body is very close to that anyway, which means that the effect of the restrictor will be virtually nil. So you'll have none of the problems that you would have had previously with choking the throttle body on an engine like the 390 KTM.
Hi, Pat. Just a quick thing. We have 10 minutes till we move into the next section.
Okay, that's okay. Okay, right, back to where we're going. Warning, parts sourced from an auto rickshaw have no place on your Formula Bharat car. Don't do it. They are low quality parts made for low quality vehicles. This is an engineering exercise. Okay, let's talk about the chassis. Don't plan for a carbon monocoque chassis or any such thing. With the limited resources, the task is too great. Instead, just build a simple space frame chassis. Use mild steel square section tube, not round tube. Use square section tube where appropriate. You'll have to use round tube in the roll loops and things like that. But square section tube, far easier to cut and join, make joints. There's no need for the difficult fish mats. The welding is easy. Jigging is easier. Fitting of panels is easier. You can fit and glue panels actually adds to the stiffness. The downside is that the chassis will weigh a little bit more, maybe 10% more, just the chassis. If you measure the circumference of, say, a 1-inch square section tube, it will come to 4 inches. And if you measure the circumference of a round tube, it'll come to 3.15 inches, like the pi number. So the difference in weight between a chassis built from square section tube and one built from round section tube will be equal to the percentage difference in weight between 3.15 and 4. Don't try to be too clever. Don't hurt your eyes looking at that. Okay, square tube, we've just talked about that. Square tube resists bending easier, it's far easier to put brackets on, a lot of good reasons. Anybody making production space frame cars, like little Formula Ford cars or Clubman sports cars, all use square section tube. They know that they're sacrificing a little weight, but production costs and production simplicity is more important than actually saving that last 4 or 5 kilos. Okay, time, as I've said, is the one thing that's been taken from us and not given back. We've talked about the intent. As mentioned earlier, people, money, and time are all interconnected. This is to gain time, and the one aspect we can't replace. Management of people and the money allows us to buy some time, but the time is still finite. And the team manager should keep that taut at the head of his management plan from day one until the last day the project is finished. I've talked before about the crisis that crop up. We don't need to recover that. And yeah, again, we're still talking about the same thing. Okay, like all of us, I can't wait for all this nonsense to finish and let's get back get back to where life the way it is. I will have my second COVID shot next Friday, and hopefully I can relax a little then. But currently I'm here in Sydney and we're facing a 14-day lockout starting today. So it really is getting to be a complete pain in the neck. Okay, I'm going to wind this up now. The end of this presentation, but I'm not going away. What I'm going to do is I'll move across to Pat's Corner. So you feel free to sort of come join me there, and I'll answer whatever questions, or we can discuss whatever thing you need to discuss there. I'll be there for, an hour or so. It's where I am now. It's 7:30 or 7:25 in the evening, so I'll stay here till about 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. I know what I'll do. I'll stay here until qualifying for the Austrian Grand Prix starts, and then I'll tell you to go away while I watch the TV. Okay, I look forward to chatting with you all over there. And once again, thanks to Kath and her crew. It really does my heart good to be able to, sit down and have a chat and pass on the knowledge from one generation to another. Good fun. Thank you, Kathy. All right, I'll see you all later.
A pleasure having you here. For all our participants, please note Pat will be at Hagrid's Hut, which is Pat's Corner on Gather.Town. Pat, you can exit the Zoom session so that you can join into Gather.Town. Thanks again.